Have experiments shown we have no free will? Borrow a little shtick from a friend of mine. The short answer is no. The long answer is no.
Ray, put the microphone up a little bit.
So here we're talking about a really age-old issue, free will versus determinism. Okay. So as I'm sure you're all aware, the determinist argument is free will is an illusion. There is no such thing as free will. In descriptive speak, there is no such thing as deliberate action. There is no form of behavior wherein the person selects from among distinguished behavioral options, selects one of them knowing what he or she is doing and enacts that behavior. No such thing as choice. Okay, and in descriptive, of course, if there's no such thing as deliberate action, there's no such thing as persons. Okay, so remember our definition, a person is an individual whose history is a history of deliberate action. Okay, some more to it, but just focus there. So the reason for taking this up again is there's a sort of a new wrinkle in this argument, or I guess you call it that, where some neuroscientists have come along and done some experiments which people have looked at and said, I conclude from this there is no free will. We now have scientific evidence to show that there is no such thing as free will. Everything is determined by unconscious brain processes. That's what's driving the whole show. Okay. This view is widely presented in academia, in psychology classes, in philosophy classes, in some neuroscience classes. It's disseminated in a lot of media. Okay, there's an article, it was just Newsweek once, has science disprove free will? And just a broad headline like that, and they talked about some of this research. So what I'm going to say today is a work in progress, not finished work, but I've got a draft. I'll be reading some things from that draft. Let me ask you to hold your questions until the end, and I think we'll try to leave plenty of time for that. And it's probably not going to be possible to take notes. It's probably too much material coming a little too fast. But anyone who wants a copy of the draft, I can send that in 2 seconds. I'll take it home. All right, well, I screwed up the new PowerPoint program, and I didn't, so. Where's the big font? Anyway, at the last minute. All right, so introduction, that's what that says. All right.
I was going to make a joke.
So this says, so what? Let's just start with the so what question. So what if people believe we're all machines? That's what we're talking about. We're not persons, we're machines. So what? What's the big deal? Okay, number of things here. To quote Pete, powerlessness corrupts. Okay. To quote one of our therapeutic policies, establish and utilize the client's control. Okay, well if this is true, if this is what people come to believe, it's in effect saying, to quote The Sopranos, forget about it. There is no such thing as control over your behavior. You do not have control over your behavior. It's all determined by causal forces. So your control is zero. If you really take this seriously, that's what you're going to believe. My control over my life, over my destiny is zero. There's a line of research now. It shows various things. What difference does it make if you believe or disbelieve in free will? So, for example, the research indicates that people who are on the disbelieving end are more prone to endorse antisocial outcomes. They're more likely actually to cheat in certain experimental situations. They express lower moral standards. They indicate a heightened disbelief that morality is even valid. To say thou shalt not steal means anything other than, well, that's somebody's opinion. That's emotionally what somebody believes emotionally. But it's really, there's no grounding for that. So, it's not really valid statement. It's not a grounded statement. So, so if you believe that your partner is a Stepford wife or a Stepford husband, remember the movie where the guys turn their wives into zombies. So this is saying, if you think of people that way, if you think of yourself that way, there's a lot of antisocial, amoral tendencies that you're likely to exhibit. Non-belief in free will undermines many institutions such as the legal, educational, religious, family, etc. systems. So you just think about concepts like in law, legal culpability. Okay, very basic. Is this person culpable for what he or she did? Okay. Well, here, if there's no free will, it doesn't even make sense. Nobody's in control of anything. Nobody's really culpable. We're all just leaves in the wind. We're just blown about by whatever forces. In religion, the notion of sin, again, nobody really sins. Everybody just does what they had to do. So that's undermined. Final thing I mentioned is really, if you believe this, is a whole question about whether truth itself is undermined, whether there can be such a thing as true, justified belief that you can place your faith in. Because essentially, you can go into some details of this, which I won't do here, but essentially, if I am a machine and my utterances, if I say X is true, if my utterances are just the output of this machine, it's output, it's determined output, and somebody else says X is false, well, that's just the determined output of their machine, of their unconscious brain processes, according to this view. If that's the view, it's really hard to say there's some basis for believing that some proposition is true, like a proposition of science itself. Because it's really hard to get, people used to say you can't get there from here. It's hard to get from brain processes to things like all the usual canons of truth, such as was this a justified conclusion from the evidence? Did it logically follow? Was the research design correct? Was the mathematics the correct choice? It's really hard to get from brain processes to all those things we usually say. This is what we need to say to believe that X is true. But you can't have them here. So it's just my machine versus your machine. Take your pick. No justification either end if you go with this view. So I think it's a very big deal that the culture's this view is being pushed on the culture, and is being pushed by people who I think are acting in good faith. They believe what they're saying, but I think it's a very harmful point of view. It's a pathogenic point of view, and big problems here. So this says the experimental case for behavioral determinism. So what's this scientific evidence? What are we talking about? Okay, well, there's two iconic experiments that I'll talk about. The first and most famous, the one that started this whole movement, comes from a man named Joseph Libet, or Benjamin Libet, and goes back to the 80s. And what he did, I'm going to try, I'm kind of constrained here a little bit. So, again, you can hear me, right? Okay.
Not so good.
That's good, all right. So what he did was he simply took people, he brought them into an experimental room, attached them to an EEG machine, and he said to them essentially, I want you to do two things. One is just whenever you feel like it, just flex your wrist. You know, so just go along, feel like it. Yeah. Okay. Wait a little bit, whenever you feel like it. Yeah. Okay. While you're doing that, I have this crazy clock here that goes around and around very fast. But I want you to notice when you make the decision, when you make the conscious decision to flex your wrist, I want you to notice where the clock is. So what I have to do is, okay, I made that decision right at 9.0 or 11.2. Okay, so to record the time of my actual conscious decision. And what he found was that a certain brain process called the reaction potential, the RP, reliably antedated and predicted the behavior. Okay. It also antedated the person's statement of "here's when I decided." So the time sequence was. The RP goes off, the brain process goes off, then the person indicates, here is where I made the conscious decision, and then here is where the behavior occurred. Right? Conclusion. Clearly, it wasn't the conscious decision that determined the behavior, it was the brain process, the RP, that's what happened first, so, okay. So, looks like free will, you say this person chose freely as well. Looks like free will is kind of an illusion here. And then the broader ideology here is really there's no causal role at all for consciousness. The one famous comparison by a guy named Bergner, he says consciousness is really like a compass on a ship. What does it do? It just monitors the direction of the ship. So, the ship turns north-northwest, and this thing monitors it. But it has no causal impact on the ship's actually making a turn. It just, when that happens, it records it, it indicates that, monitors it. But it has no causal efficacy. That is what consciousness does. It's just a monitor. It doesn't determine anything. It's indeterminate water. It is epiphenomenal. Okay, so then some years later, that was back in the 80s, a fellow named John Dylan Haynes formed a research team in Berlin. Haynes is a pretty cool guy. You can see him on YouTube talking about this. Anyway, so he did a more sophisticated version of the Libet experiment. And what he did is he put people in an fMRI machine. And he said, okay, what I want you to do, again, two things. One is, you got two buttons. There's a right button, left button. Right hand, left hand. Okay. What I want you to do is just sit there and, just like Libet here, whenever you feel like it, press whatever button you choose. Press this one, press this one. Okay? Just whatever moves, whatever you feel like. Whenever you feel like, whatever you feel like. Okay, just. And then he had a little screen that flashed letters. So X, Z, F, G, H, O, quickly. He said, okay, and when you make the conscious decision to press, notice what letter is up. So you do that, you say, okay, G was up when I made that decision. So you record G. All right, so that tells them what was the time of your decision. So same result. What they find is that the time that certain brain events in the two areas of the brain, the Brodmann's 10 area or BA10 area of the brain and the parietal cortex area of the brain, indications in there reliably predicted when the person was going to press, okay? And dramatically, they did so like 7 to 10 seconds before the person actually pressed.
Seconds?
7 to 10 seconds before the person actually, yeah. So as one philosopher said, when I first heard that, a guy named Mark Balaguer, he said, when I first heard that result, my reaction was, holy crap. That is traumatic. So same conclusion. Looks like the brain process, not the decision, is what caused the action. It occurred way before the conscious decision. So free will was an illusion here. No free will. We don't believe in free will. This invalidates free will. And no causal role at all for consciousness. So just to be really clear here, there's when these determinists are talking, it's hardcore determinism. So you look out there and people talk about determinism, causality different ways. There's soft determinism, there's compatibilism, there's statistical determinism. This is hardcore stuff. In the words of one philosopher, Colin McGinn, he said, put it this way, he says, given the prior state of the brain, there is only one thing that could possibly happen. End of story. Okay, so this is billiard ball causality. The ball hits at this speed, at this angle of incident, that's what's going to happen. That's it, Okay, so that's the experimental evidence. Those are the conclusions drawn from it. That's what has a lot of people who like to believe in persons and free will, deliberate action, are disturbed about. So, are there any problems with these conclusions? So,
Short answer and a long answer.
so the first kind of problem is generalizability problem. And, all right, so just reading a bit here. The de facto logic at work in the foregoing anti-free will argument, when pared down to its basics, seems to be the following. 1, for some simple physical movements, for example, flexing one's wrist or pressing a button, there is evidence that neural events relevant to these movements begin before one's conscious awareness of a decision to enact the behavior. Okay? 2, thus, these neural events, not one's conscious, now we're getting into interpretation, okay? Thus, these neural events, not one's conscious decision, are the actual causes of behavior. Okay. 3, therefore, non-conscious brain events, not persons' perceived decisions, are the actual causes of human behavior. The perception of choice is both illusory and epiphenomenal. There is no free will. In this argument, a massive generalization occurs between 2 and 3. In effect, in the argument, simple behaviors such as flexing one's wrist or pressing a button stand proxy for all human behaviors and decisions. Okay? As a beginning here, let us simply list in a merely common sense, observational way some of the sorts of decisions and actions that persons commonly undertake in the course of everyday life. So all these are just a list of everyday intentional actions or deliberate actions that we see. We enact certain behaviors with no conscious awareness or very little such awareness. Some of these behaviors are very simple ones. We brush hair away from our eyes, we apply the brake pedal in our cars, or we eat a piece of popcorn while absorbed in a movie. I think if somebody asks you 3 seconds, did you just have a piece of popcorn? And I don't know. Just applied the brake, nearly done. I don't know. You think about it. Just do it. It's intentional but not deliberate. You're not, should I press the brake pedal or not? Other of these behaviors are more complex. For example, we make social judgments, solve problems, or compose lines of prose or music that are then experienced as things that come to us that we must have somehow formulated unconsciously. Okay, and there's a literature here on what's called unconscious cognition. Okay. Secondly, we enact behavioral sequences with each discrete act in the sequence, in which each discrete act in the sequence is performed rapidly with little or no conscious forethought. For example, we hit the next piano key while playing a piano piece, or we type the next letter in text. Not a lot of thought. You're not saying, what should I hit next? Or you laying, you don't want to do that, do you? What should I hit next? Playing some piano teacher. Okay, what should I do that? It's pretty disastrous. We enact complex behaviors involving significant cognitive work while consciously aware of what we're doing. For example, we create a new computer password, carefully compose a sentence and a message, or select our next move in a chess game. Okay? Everybody knows we do that kind of thing. We sometimes have to make split-second decisions to veer our cars left or right upon suddenly recognizing a danger in the road, to pass or shoot the basketball during a fast-paced game, or to call heads or tails while the coin is in the air. So again, just think, can I generalize from this to this item, to this item? Can I just feel free to generalize? We enact behaviors that are entirely cognitive and do not involve any motor element whatsoever. Okay? There's no motor element to it. For example, we do calculations in our heads, we meditate, or we lie in bed and think about what we have to do today. So there's no motor element at all. Einstein does his thought experiments. What if I leave Earth at the speed of light? What are the consequences? He's just sitting there. All you're going to see is Albert. Okay. Not a lot of motor behavior there. We enact behaviors where we find ourselves doing something without consciously deciding to do it. For example, humming a tune, thinking about an important problem confronting us, or daydreaming about a romantic partner. 7, we decide not to act. Okay? For example, not to reply to a request, not to get out of bed yet, or not to order another glass of wine. Okay? We do that all the time. No, I'm not going to have another glass of wine. Got to drive home. A few more of these. We consciously abort certain initiated behaviors. For example, we refrain from continuing to say something upon realizing it could be misinterpreted, We pull back from touching something when we realize it might be hot, or we stop ourselves upon starting to run a yellow light. Two more. We decide to act not immediately, but in the near or distant future. For example, to watch the news when it comes on in 10 minutes, to go to the store after work, or to vacation in Canada next summer. Okay, so decision is here. We're going to go to Canada next summer. We're going to watch the news in 10 minutes. Action is 10 minutes later or 9 months later. We generalize to that. Finally, we make decisions in which we consciously go back and forth between alternatives before arriving at a final choice. For example, regarding which ice cream flavor to purchase, what trip to take next summer, or whether or not to propose marriage. So the generalizability question becomes this: can a simple motoric act, lasting perhaps 1 or 2 seconds, requiring almost no thought at all, and engaged in solely because someone instructed us to do it, generalize successfully to all of these kinds of familiar everyday behaviors and decisions? Okay. So can you take this and say, I can generalize from this or from this, but am I justified in generalizing? At a minimum, it would seem incumbent on those wishing to generalize from the very quick, ultra-simple, Libet-type experimental motor tests, requiring virtually no thought at all to the above kinds of observable phenomena, to empirically demonstrate their generalizability, not to simply declare this generalizability with no empirical foundation whatsoever. Okay, so that's what's happening here. Here's the phenomenon. You know, they say, we feel free to generalize this to all of these things, all of these behavioral phenomena, all these kinds of decisions. You know, that's okay. And then you just have a little dialogue here, Will and Gil kind of thing. So, let's see, so you're a scientist, right? You live in empiricism, right? So, don't you need some evidence?
Not in this case.
Seems like you're just kind of declaring this, you know? It's like, I remember back in school, it's like, there was this slogan, this is way back, I remember school talking, it said, the laws of behavior apply to all behavior. You know how you encountered that. And so then it needs to be said about Skinner's pigeons. You know, we showed that they operated according to these schedules of reinforcement. You know. Ergo, people do. You know, it's like, no, you gotta show it. Oops, what's going on here? All right, this says, it's showing. Oh, I didn't have subcases here. Oh, it's your show.
There you go.
All right, so this says, some A is B, therefore all A is B. Okay. So this comes at the same point in a little different way. So here my little vignette is Logic 101 teacher. He says, class, we've been talking about valid and invalid forms of argument, so let's look at some and let's discuss them. Okay. Today, the first one is logical argument is some A is B, therefore all A is B. All of those of you who think that's a valid logical form, valid logical argument, raise your hand. I think even in Logic 101, not many hands would go up. How many believe that's invalid? You know, this is like, come on. But that is the Lebesguean argument. Okay. I invented this word, Lebesguean. That's the argument. Okay. So the thing is, even if you grant that these behaviors were determined, even if you granted that they showed that these were determined behaviors, you'd still have this problem. You'd have shown some A is B, some behavior is determined, therefore all behavior is determined. No, can't do that. One of the things we all know is we know there's behavior. We know there's obsessive compulsive behavior. We knew this long before the Lebesgue experiments. And we know there's people who, they feel compelled to wash their hands 70 times a day, or to go down and check the locks 5 times, or make sure the gas is off 5 times. We know that there are situations. The gunman jumps out of the alley and points a gun at you and says, "You monitor your life." So we all know there's situations where some people would say, well, yeah, there's no choice at all. Other people would say, well, maybe a little bit, but your freedom is your free choice is very much constrained. But do we go around saying, the OCD thing happens, therefore there is no such thing as choice? We don't do that, okay? But that's what's being done here. That's what they're saying here, in effect. All right. Problems with Haynes research. As reported at the outset, experimental results obtained by the Haynes research team in 2008 indicated that to a statistically significant degree, patterns of brain activity in the Brodmann's 10 and parietal cortex areas of the brain predicted participants' decisions to press a right or a left button by as many as 7 to 10 seconds. In closing this section, some brief comments on this research are in order. First, in a situation where chance prediction would be 50%, right or left, just guess, 50% should be the 50-50 bet. The obtained figure was, the accuracy figure was it 98%, 95%, 85%, 100%? The obtained figure was 60%. This is like 10% over chance, okay? Almost every time you read about this, they don't say that. And you read the study and went, oh God, they're just doing statistically better than chance, but not a hell of a lot better than chance. While notably better than chance, this hardly provides compelling evidence of the determinist claim that, given the initial conditions, only one outcome could have ensued. Okay. Right. So you're standing there by the machine looking at the initial conditions, and maybe the Haynes standing there saying, okay, it's going to be all right. Ha, look, he pressed right. It's going to be a left. Look, see, he pressed. Okay, it's going to be a right. Oops. Left. Wow, okay. It's going to be all right. Oops, left. It's like, at the end, and that person's Haynes says to you, there, see, only one outcome could have ensued. And you go, what? It's like Groucho Marx used to say, you're going to believe me, you're going to believe your own eyes, All right, second problem here, an error of the post hoc ergo propter hoc classical form, after this, therefore, because of this kind, may have been committed here. There is no strong reason to conclude that the earlier brain events, while they predicted the later choice above chance, actually caused that choice. The Haynes group themselves note that the BA10 and parietal cortex area activities tracked are involved in planning and storage of conscious action plans. So it's planning, it's associated with planning behavior. Okay. Thus, an alternative reading of the results might be not that these events efficiently cause the choice made, but that the researchers picked up indications of what participants were planning to do 7 seconds prior to their acting, but this was just only accurate a little above chance. So you just think, what happens all the time here? You know, it's like you're at the restaurant, and dessert time, so we're going to have the rice pudding or the creme caramel. You say, I'm going to go with the creme caramel. All right. Waitress comes, you go, give me the rice pudding. So you have a plan, we have a formed plan, you distort that plan, but at the last minute you go, I'll give you the other thing. Okay, so just commonsensically, you think about plans as not determining, not efficiently causing, not being these inevitable, ineluctable kinds of causal forces. They're plans, okay? And, whatever the case, what you get here is they're tapping these planning areas and they're just getting 60% accuracy. So, you don't want to say only one outcome could possibly have ensued. Okay, third problem with Haynes. Third, it is impossible to envision a Haynes result applying in many real-world situations. Most obviously, perhaps, persons at times must make split-second decisions, for example, to veer their cars right or left upon detecting sudden danger. It is simply an impossibility that such decisions were predictable 7 seconds prior to the circumstances that even warranted their being made. As philosopher Eddie Namias has noted, if that were true, we'd all be dead. All right, so big problems with Haynes' conclusions. Big problems, I think. All right. So, this is called, this heading is the power of won't. So right from the get-go, back in the 80s, Libet said, people have something called the power of won't. They can start to flex their wrist, and then they can cancel it. Okay? And he did some experiments to show that. They weren't great experiments. A guy named Alfred Mealy at Florida State, again, a philosopher, he kind of reran these things and showed, look, it's not really, doesn't really work very well. But Haynes came along and he said, let me test this power rule, let me try to do it better. And so, recently, this was 2015, recently Haynes and his research team conducted a methodologically improved experiment to determine whether the phenomenon of free won't was a reality or not. In this experiment, they tested whether participants could win a duel. So they made up a little game. It's a duel, guys. It'll be a duel between you and the computer. Whether participants could win a duel against a brain-computer interface designed to predict their movements in real time from observations of their EEG activity. So this is that RP thing again, the thing that antedates the decision by 0.3 of a second or so. Findings indicated that participants were able to exert a veto even after the onset of the RP preparatory process. Okay, so the RP could occur and they could veto it. They had a half a second. It'd be 0.3 of a second to when they say they make the decision, and another 2 or 0.3 of a second before they actually press their wrist or whatever, press the button. Okay. So it indicated participants were able to exert a veto even after onset of the RP preparatory process. Okay. In discussing this outcome, Haynes stated that, quote, a person's decisions are not at the mercy of unconscious and early brainwaves. They are able to actively intervene in the decision-making process and interrupt a movement. Still quoting, previously people had used the preparatory brain signals to argue against free will. Our study now shows that the freedom is much less limited than previously thought. So he's not saying total free will here, but he's saying, people have more freedom than we thought they had, and we're saying this on the basis of our experiments as of 2015. So he's saying, so a little evidence on the other side of things, folks. So conclusion, I have some other things here which we won't go into. My favorite is, why would robots prefer chocolate?
Why would robots prefer chocolate?
Why would robots prefer chocolate?
I think you got to tell us that.
Can't help it.
They can't help it.
And he couldn't help it either.
That's why we call them robots.
Persuasive marketing.
All right. Where is he at? All right. So I think at the end of the day, free will versus determinism is a metaphysical problem. It's strictly speaking empirically undecidable. There's not going to be some finding that says, that's it, proof positive, that's it. But what I think what is important here is that there are people out there, I'm not saying they're ill-intentioned people, who are saying, basically, hey folks, you are all essentially organic robots. You think you have free will, that is an illusion. We have evidence to prove it. It's hard scientific evidence. Neuroscience says, so this is being pushed upon the public, probably especially more educated people. And as I said earlier, there's really important considerations of why it's really bad for individuals, bad for societies, bad for us, bad for a sense of our control over our whole life, that we believe this. So I think what you can do, and what I hope I have done here, is draw forth some arguments and say, the evidence that is adduced here does not make the case. Thank you. Questions? What's your question? It's predetermined.
Yes. Why would robots prefer chocolate?
All right, I'm just going to riff through this really fast. It's pretty readable.
But if I didn't ask it, someone else would have, right?
All right, briefly here. Okay, people eat chocolate, seek out sexual experiences, take aspirin when they have a headache, and try to avoid being outside in very hot weather. A Lebetian person, however, basically an organic robot, is essentially a zombie or an organic robot with a non-causal overlay of conscious awareness. It, not he or she, it possesses sentience, but this sentience, it is alleged, has no more causal efficacy in influencing behavior than does a ship's compass play a causal role in influencing the ship's direction. Not making a difference. Sentience makes no, that's what they're saying. This being the case, the question arises to why, in the Lebedian scheme, people would act on what seemed to be, what would seem entirely or largely experientially based reasons, such as the taste of chocolate, the pleasure of sex, the pain of a headache, or the unpleasantness of hot weather. Why, in other words, would they do these or anything else that from a common sense point of view seem aimed at deriving pleasure and avoiding pain? Indeed, on the Lebedian account, experiential phenomena that entire philosophical and psychological theories of human behavior have been built around for centuries, hedonism, for example, are declared wholly irrelevant to why we do what we do. Yes, we do experience these things, the Lebedian admits, but they cause nothing. They make no difference in our behavior. Okay, so organic robots shouldn't prefer chocolate if Lebedianism is true. That's why.